All right. Today is day 26 of Bible in 90 Days, or What's in the Bible, where we're looking through the entire Bible from Genesis, the beginning, all the way to Revelation, the end, just to see what the Bible talks about, the story of the Bible, the full picture of the Bible, rather than studying just specific verses or chapters or books or characters or topics or themes or whatever. We're just looking at the entire book just to get a summary of what the Bible says. So we said we're in the book of First Kings at the moment, so we're just continuing First Kings, a time where the Israelites or the nation of Israel was being ruled over or led, by the kings. We've seen the story of King Saul, King David, King Solomon, and all the other kings that came after that, and the eventual split of the kingdom, i.e. Judah on one side, where it would have its different kings, and Israel, the rest of the tribes of Israel, that would also have, their different kings. So that's where we kind of ended. Today we continue. We're going to finish off First Kings, then we're going to go into Second Kings. So today is First Kings chapter 17 all the way to Second Kings chapter 4. So First Kings 17, a guy steps on the scene that we've probably not heard anything about so far. His name is Elijah. That's all we hear. The first thing we hear is, his full-blown ministry. We don't know where he came from or whatever. So First Kings 17, Elijah proclaims a drought and is told to hide, by God. He was fed by the ravens whilst he was in this wilderness, and afterwards he was sent to a widow in Zarephath. We then hear about the miraculous provision worked through Elijah, to feed this widow as well as Elijah himself. He then later raises her dead son to life. So you can see that his life was packed with miracles, as we will see even through today's reading, through miracles and direct access to God, and God speaking to him and telling him what to do, in that time. So at this time, Ahab was the king of Israel, which we finished off yesterday, and that he was a bad king and all the things that he was doing. So Elijah was sent to Ahab in the third year because the rain was about to come, because obviously there was a famine for 3 years in the land, and obviously this is why Elijah was not a very popular guy, because he had pronounced this drought. So but anyway, in the third year there was rain that was about to come. We hear a story about a guy called Obadiah, who was actually a great guy, who had hid and provided for the prophets when Jezebel was killing them. So Jezebel, the wife of Ahab, had this religion or this worship of a god called Baal. She had her own prophets, etc. And to make sure that that would continue, she had to kill all the other prophets of God that were speaking against this religion and telling the Israelites to follow the true God. So Elijah then meets Ahab and explains why there was a drought, i.e. the false worship and the worshipping of idols. There is then this contest between the prophets of Baal and Elijah, on his own, and they do all these things to try and make Baal, whatever this false god was, to answer the prayer, but he doesn't. So Elijah then comes along and God answers by fire. That's where the popular thing comes about, that God answers by fire. So God answers by fire, and obviously Elijah is seen to be the true prophet. Then they kill all the prophets of Baal. Then after that the rain actually falls and the drought is over. So Elijah at this point, 1 Kings 19, he has to flee because Jezebel wants to kill him, because he's basically killed all her prophets for whatever they'd just done in 1 Kings 18. Elijah at this point has had enough, and he asks God to kill him. But God, does things a very different way, and tells him that he actually preserved 7,000 people, because Elijah thought he was the only one that was left that had anything to do with following God in the right way, etc. But God tells him to relax, and there were 7,000 people that were already set aside to worship God. Elijah is then told to anoint Hazael to be the king of Aram, Jehu to be the king of Israel, and Elisha to be the new prophet of Israel. We also hear a little bit of the story of how Elisha was actually called by Elijah. First Kings chapter 20, we hear about a war between Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, and Israel. We hear that God intervenes by sending a prophet with some instructions as to how they would win. Aram is beaten in the hills as well as in the plains. Then Ben-Hadad, after this, he asks for forgiveness, and Ahab kind of forgives him, and there's a treaty that is set up about about peace. God then sends a prophet to pronounce judgment on Ahab for letting the king of Aram go, because he was not supposed to to do that. 1 Kings 21, we hear about a guy called Naboth, where the vineyard that Ahab actually wanted this this vineyard, but Naboth didn't want to give it away because it was something that was in their family. Ahab is not happy about this, and Jezebel picks up on it, so she then puts a plan in motion, and they actually kill Naboth and take the vineyard. But God sees this, and he sends Elijah again to Ahab to say, listen, I've seen what you have done, the fact that you have killed an innocent man for this vineyard. So as a result, God said he would destroy the house of of Ahab. But at this point, Ahab actually repents sincerely, and God kind of stops the judgment from coming straight away. 1 Kings 22, which is actually the last chapter of 1 Kings, we hear about a king called Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah. So remember, some of the stories intermingle sometimes, and they're not exactly chronologically set in a nice way. However, if you concentrate, you can actually kind of find out how the story is moving. But anyway, the king of Judah here, Jehoshaphat, and Ahab, they go to war with the king of Aram after they'd been told by all the prophets that it was okay, that they would win, etc. But we hear a story about a prophet called Micaiah, who actually knew the real reason why all these prophets were telling Jehoshaphat and Ahab to go to war. And this Micaiah was always known for not saying whatever everybody else wanted him to say. He would only always say what God what God told him. So Micaiah then exposes the truth. But however, Jehoshaphat and Ahab, they go to war anyway. And in this war, Ahab is killed in the war, and Ahaziah, who is the son of Ahab, then reigns. Jehoshaphat, we're told, was the son of Asa, and he was a good king in Judah, and he followed after his father Asa, who was also a good king, as well as David. We then hear about some story of Jehoshaphat's ships that were destroyed, and the death of Jehoshaphat, who was then succeeded by Jehoram. We also told, obviously, as we already know, that Ahaziah was a bad king, i.e. the sin in Israel and the worship of idols. We then jump over into the book of 2 Kings, which is just a continuation of the story. 2 Kings chapter 1, Ahaziah, this bad king that we were just reading about, he then falls, I think, through a lattice or whatever. Then he's injured, and he sends word to one of the other false gods to actually find out whether he was going to be healed. But Elijah intercepts this message and actually tells him that he was going to surely die, and saying, why are you going to ask other gods when there's a prophet in Israel, or when you can actually inquire from God? We then hear the process that Ahaziah tries to put in place to call Elijah, and it was a captain. He would always send a captain with 50 guys, but they would keep getting killed by Elijah, until the very last one, who went with a humble attitude, and they managed to bring Elijah back to see Ahaziah. But at this point, Elijah simply tells him exactly the same story, that he was going to die as a result of all the sin that was happening in Israel. We then hear that Ahaziah is succeeded by Jehoram, his brother, because Ahaziah didn't have any sons. 2 Kings chapter 2, the story pans back to Elijah when he's going through 4 cities, Gilgal, Bethel, Jericho, and Jordan, and Elisha is just following him everywhere. So anytime Elijah says, I want to go there, Elisha would follow him there, because Elisha knew, and so did all the other prophets, that Elijah was about to be taken away from them. So Elijah asked Elisha what he wanted, and Elisha says, I want a double portion, or a double anointing, as they call, of whatever it is that you have. Elijah tells him that it's a really hard thing that he had asked. However, if he would see him when he was being taken away, then he would get what he wanted. So Elijah at this point is taken up to heaven, with chariots of fire, and Elisha becomes the new prophet in the place, of Elijah, and he starts to do certain miracles that we can't actually see that, okay, Elisha is the new guy, in town. So things like he parts the Jordan, he cures the water, and he punishes, some boys. So he was obviously working in this kind of power and this new authority. Second Kings chapter 3, we hear about a king of Israel called Jehoram, who was a bad king. And there was this war that happened against Moab, where Israel, Judah, and Edom, they all came together to, to fight against the king of Moab. We then hear about the miraculous provision of water, because all these kings and their armies, they didn't have any water, so they were given water through consulting Elisha, and they had a victory over Moab. Second Kings chapter 4, today's last chapter. Elisha, we hear about the miraculous oil that he gives or makes happen for this one of the wife of the prophets who was in debt, and her sons were about to be taken away from her so that they could be sold into slavery to pay for this debt. But he tells her to just get some vessels, and oil that she had would continue to pour so that she could sell it and pay these debts off and be able to live on that as well. We then hear about a woman of Shunem who was very hospitable to Elisha, and built him a room and would feed him every time he was there. So obviously he wants to reciprocate, and he prays for her and prophesies that she would have a baby, and she actually does have a son around that same time the following year. But after a while, this child dies, and Elisha again, comes to the, to the rescue, or whatever you would call it, and actually raises this child, back to life. Elisha then does a bunch of other miracles, like curing the poison that was in a pot that was about to kill some people, and another miracle about the first fruits, where there wasn't enough food from the first fruits, but this was actually multiplied through through Elisha, so that everybody could be fed. So yes, today we're beginning to see more the authority and the ministry of the prophets now in Israel that were being sent by God during this time, whereby the kings were supposed to lead the Israelites in the right way and make them follow the commands, where we're not doing what they were supposed to be doing. However, so God is now using the prophets to communicate his true message, to the Israelites. So the kings are still there, the kings of Judah are still there, the kings of Israel are still there as a result of the split, of Israel. But the prophets now are the ones who are actually bringing the word. So as soon as we finish the books of the Kings and the Chronicles, we will actually then start to see some of the, the prophets, that God sent during this time, to tell the Israelites what to do. So yeah, I hope that's helpful. Really, really exciting stuff, and just getting to know the story, of what happened, so that by the time we get to the New Testament, hear about Jesus and the apostles, etc., we will have a very good, solid foundation and background as to why certain things happened in the way that they did. So yeah, hopefully you guys will have a great week, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.